Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Primetime Podcast. I know it's been a week. We did not put a video out last week, and that was unfortunate. But as we suspected, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, the campaign was going to heat up, and it has. And we're grateful and we're blessed to be able to run such a campaign. And but we've been very busy. So let me just tell you a little bit about how this is going to go over the next 2 weeks, or between now, this podcast, and the next podcast leading up to May 19th, which is the primary. I want it to be understood. So this will be one of the last 2 podcasts that we do for the campaign leading up to the primary. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the comparison chart. I put out the first part of this week, a comparison chart about leadership in law enforcement and, what the records are. I've often said that we're not going to attack the individual. Okay. Now, I don't know that, Sheriff Birch and his supporters can say that about us and my campaign, and certainly people in my campaign, to include me. That's part of it, I suppose. I will tell you that, I've often said that public records are open for scrutiny. They really are. And if I've been a public leader and the other candidate that I'm running against is a public leader, we both have a public record, and records are open for scrutiny. The sheriff's race in Mobile County is important because you now have a chance to pick between 2 individuals that have a public record in public safety and law enforcement. What have they done, certainly with their abilities, experience, qualifications, and what they've been entrusted with. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And again, we're not going to disparage anybody, and I know that Birch's supporters are going to say that I'm mudslinging, but we're not, right? I am much like the sheriff trying to appeal to those in the middle. He has a base, I have a base, and we're trying to appeal to the voters in the middle that simply do not know. This is not a situation where you have a person running for office, or 2 people running for office that are just making promises or making allegations or making statements trying to earn your support. You now have candidates that both have in excess of 30 years of law enforcement experience and a track record. And we're going to go through that. Okay. So I put out earlier, the first part of this week, some of the issues that we're facing here in Mobile County. And we'll go through some of those today. And I've got some of the words bigger here on my laptop, so maybe I don't have to put my readers on. But the first issue we're going to just get right into it. Okay. The first issue is body-worn cameras. And I am going to show you where the sheriff stands on body-worn cameras and, of course, where I stand. Take a look for yourself.
One key difference in the race, body cameras. Birch tells me while the sheriff's office is installing dash cameras, he doesn't see a need for deputies to wear body cameras.
The way I look at it, there are hundreds of thousands of body cameras out here every day. You can't go anywhere without someone filming what's going on.
Prine says if he's elected, deputies would wear these devices.
So as you can see, the sheriff is not for body-worn cameras. He actually held up his phone during an interview, and he also did it not only during that interview, but he also did it at, I believe it was the Dolphin Way United Methodist Church Forum that we had a couple of weeks ago. And he did the same thing. He held his phone up and he said, well, every citizen, everybody now has a cell phone. And if they want to essentially record the interaction between law enforcement, they could. What he essentially told you is that he's not for transparency. It's just another way of saying, no, I'm not going to outfit the deputies with body-worn cameras. I believe in the year of 2026, we need body-worn cameras. And my commitment is to work with the county commission to outfit every deputy with body-worn cameras. Listen, we all trust, we all back the blue. For the most part, society does back the blue. But let me just tell you, having been in this business now over 30 years and being the police chief of arguably the second largest organization in the state, and I know the sheriff has said, oh, that's a municipality, that's a police department. It's not like the sheriff's department trying to make it like it's so much bigger. Understand this, the sheriff's department is a third of the size of the Mobile Police Department. He couldn't fathom the possibility or the responsibility that the chief has for such a large organization. We face so many things scrutinized in so many ways that the sheriff is not scrutinized. Let me tell you, body-worn cameras are important, and while we love our law enforcement officers, they can be involved in misconduct. We talked a little bit about a couple of weeks ago about some of the frivolous spending with overtime, and then some of the deputies that are involved in fleecing those taxpayer money have come out and personally attacked me. Listen, that is a violation of their code of conduct, their oath of office. And, if they've not done anything improper or stolen the money or anything to that nature, there's no reason to be upset. There's no reason to be mad. And at the end of the day, body-worn cameras are important. When you have an issue out there where a citizen makes an allegation against a deputy, there is absolutely no reason we don't have body-worn cameras. And to simply suggest that it is the citizen's responsibility to record that interaction, that places the burden of government on the people. And that is totally contrary to what the U.S. Constitution says. If you read the Constitution, it is about limiting and controlling powers with the government, not with the people. And so I think it's just important that I believe in body-worn cameras. I believe the burden is on the government and the leaders of government to ensure that their employees and that their department or organization is doing what it is supposed to do in a fair and equitable way when it comes to being the sheriff, and ensuring that the deputies are delegating their authority and responsibility with their jobs out in the field with you, the public, and to ensure that they're doing things right by people, that we're not violating people's rights, and yes, fairness and dignity. I will simply say, even some of those deputies that have attacked me, if they're willing to attack me and not one of them has said that the wages were wrong in regards to all that overtime that some of them made, then they're attacking me for telling the truth. And if they'll attack me for simply being a truth teller, my friends, what do you think they're going to do every day when they're out there with you and you make them mad or upset, and they don't have the moral discipline to not be vindictive, to not rail against you, or perhaps not even lie? Enough about body-worn cameras. That's my position on it. I hope that's your position on it. We'll move forward. It walks us in to the second card is the Second Amendment, no exceptions. Again, the U.S. Constitution puts the burden on government, not its people. And I'll let you see this for yourself. Birch simply says that he planned to chip away at the permitless carry. Now, if you'll remember, a couple of years ago, permitless carry essentially rescinded the mandated permits that people had to go if they wanted to carry their weapon concealed in the state of Alabama. Now, you can still go get a permit, and I do think permits are valid. You still have to go to the sheriff's office for several reasons, mainly if you want to travel outside of state. Other states have these type of requirements where you have to have a gun permit, and so because of reciprocity, if those other states have pistol permit laws, they will, for the most part, honor Alabama's pistol permit law if you travel out of state. And I'm a proponent of that, and I'm a big time advocate of carry, and I think those things are important. So let's understand where I stand. Let's understand this: the pistol permit situation was never about controlling criminals. It was a way that sometime many years ago, sheriffs said, hey, we can collect money lawfully, because it's essentially a tax, in my opinion, and we don't have to have oversight of that money. So what does that mean? Where does the sheriff's office get their money? They get their money from the Mobile County Commission. But the sheriff's fund comes directly from those buying pistol permits. It's the fees. And so the sheriffs across the state of Alabama does not have to have oversight. They don't need permission on where to spend that money. And when you're collecting millions of dollars a year, it is a big deal for them. And they'll say, oh, we use it for training. We use it for buying equipment needs or whatever. But that's not really what it was intended for. At the end of the day, if you need training, if you need equipment, you get that pool of money from the county commission. And then we'll talk a little bit about budget experience and why maybe a lot of times these sheriffs say that, because they're depending on your ignorance of the process in trying to pass these permit laws so they can collect the money and essentially have no accountability or oversight over your money. And that's not good either. I don't care how good a leader is. There always should have to be checks and balances, because people are flawed. Human nature is what it is. And that's why you have checks and balances in government. So you know where I stand. I don't believe that we should burden citizens. And because somebody has a weapon, we are now criminalizing a person simply for having a weapon in a car because they don't have a permit. Can you imagine all the young people that have been criminalized? They have been given a criminal record, probably as a result of that criminal record, not been able to get jobs, having to answer for some of these criminal records for no fault of other than just having a pistol in the car. And I think that is so disingenuous to the public. And, you know, this idea, well, you're saving lives, you're preventing crimes. Well, in some of those cases, maybe perhaps that is the case. But when you're burdening most of mainstream society for the idea that we want to prevent crime, listen, we live in a dangerous world. We've always lived in a dangerous world. If you look back through the annals of history, we've always had a dangerous society. But when you start burdening the law-abiding citizen in hopes that you're preventing crime somewhere down the road, I don't know that I prescribe certainly to that mindset. The next one, we're going to go to independent investigations. And as you see the card, I've had some people say, oh, well, anybody could create this card and make themselves look good. Listen, a lot of people do this type of thing, but I am coming to you direct and explaining to you why I am a yes on this card and why Birch is a no on this card. Independent investigations, what does that mean? Well, I have said from the onset, I try to do this with the Mobile Police Department. Certainly my former boss, James Barber, did not want me to do it. We had early in my tenure as the chief talked about doing independent investigations when it comes to either an officer being killed in the line of duty or even a citizen, God forbid, either one of those are killed as a result of that contact between law enforcement and the community. There's a loss of life. I do not believe that police departments should be investigating themselves. Remember, I am about accountability. I am the law and order candidate. I have lived a life of law and order, trying to live up and be a model citizen. That includes working on the police department. I don't care what Sandy Stimpson told you about why I left. We can talk a little bit about that here later. At the end of the day, I am the law and order candidate. I value the sanctity of life, and my position is this. It is the government's job to be transparent where they can with people. Now, transparency doesn't mean you as the voter get to see or know everything that you want to know. There are just some things about critical incidences that you just can't know. There may be legal reasons why, there may be litigations why, and unfortunately we live in a world where plaintiff attorneys try their best to twist, sensationalize, and manipulate what the truth is, right? Because it comes down to money when they start filing lawsuits. Independent investigations should be transparent in the way that if I am the sheriff and there is one of these incidences that happen where there's a loss to life with either a deputy or a contact with a citizen, there should be a situation where the sheriff can go to the state police, have a memorandum of understanding that, hey, when we have these things, we need to be transparent, and we're going to invite the state police to come in and investigate these scenarios. And then they, remember now, there are two parts to an investigation when it comes to these type of critical incidences, right? You have the administrative investigation, which determines whether or not the officer violated policy in any scenario. Doesn't mean that, it contributed to the encounter, but they violated policy, and that's a serious thing. That will continue to be handled by the Internal Affairs Department. But the criminal matter, see, when these situations happen, an officer or deputy, especially if it's a citizen that lost their life, the officer or the deputy also has to face the same scrutiny. Did they violate policy, and did they violate the law? Did they violate somebody's constitutional rights? And I don't believe that agencies ought to be investigating themselves in that regard. I think those are such critical incidences of a critical nature where the public is looking for truth and they're looking for transparency. And that in that scenario where the state of Alabama state police would come in and investigate these few scenarios, they work directly with the district attorney's office, and it takes out the impropriety or even the appearance that there's wrongdoing from the agency involved in the district attorney's office. Because I really do believe that everybody wants truth and transparency for the most part. So that being said, let's make it clear, when we have those type of scenarios, I believe in calling in the state police, working with them, and making sure that they do the criminal investigation. And if there is criminal conduct on behalf of the deputy, then the deputy will have to face whatever those consequences are, certainly, with the district attorney's office. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about open records and transparency. Why is that important? Open records should be transparent. The budget should be transparent. You should know where your money is being used at. You should know with the type of equipment that the sheriff's office is buying. You should understand how much money was given to the sheriff's department for that fiscal year to run both the jail and the sheriff's department, the enforcement side. And at the end of the year, be able to compare what equipment was bought, how much investment did you really get per dollar. And that includes, turning over an annual crime report. The sheriff's department does not submit an annual crime report for review. I know the sheriff will tell you, we'll talk a little bit about that later on, but the sheriff will tell you that the numbers are out there, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So a lot of people say, well, what about open records when it comes to body-worn cameras? Well, that's up for debate. It's always up for debate because the public will tell you, and the media will convince the public, and it's probably true to some extent, right? That, well, that's those body-worn cameras are paid with taxpayer dollars. Well, they are true, but for many reasons, like I talked with you with the independent investigations, there are going to be times where there's critical incidences, and we are not going to show the video to the public. If you go down that road in my position, it doesn't mean my position doesn't change later, right? Because as we grow through time, as we learn things, as society moves forward in this construct, if you will, things change, right? But as of right now, if there is a critical incident, the public doesn't necessarily see the videos, because when you start trying a scenario or an incident, in my opinion, in the public, especially on social media or broadcast, you're essentially trying that case in the court of public opinion. And so everybody has an opinion, but everybody's opinion is not relevant, and everybody's opinion is not necessarily that's constructive. And it can't be if you don't have all the information. And so I've always been a big proponent that even police officers are going to mess up, but when they do, they have their time in court as well. And we should always do whatever we can to preserve the judicial system in a way that whether it's a citizen or a deputy, everybody has their opportunity in court. The Constitution says everybody's innocent until proven guilty. That's the system we live in. Now, whether or not it's in practicality, that's something different. But now keep in mind, when I was the chief of police for the Mobile Police Department, we did change the body worn cameras, if you'll remember, and that I was the one that changed the policy and said, and worked with the city council that says, listen, okay, well, we're not going to show the critical incident to the public for some of the reasons I told you, and also reasons that why the plaintiff attorneys come in and they try to sensationalize an already really bad situation regardless. And they do it for monetary reasons, but I just don't think that's appropriate. However, I also believe too that the family and the attorneys of those involved in that scenario should be able to view the body worn camera. And so it was essentially a rule change that I made within the Mobile Police Department that said within 7 days of an incident, the family and their legal representation can come in and review the body worn camera. Now, that is appropriate in my opinion, and that's transparency. I understand when it comes to the loss of life with the citizens in the county that everybody wants to know. And I do believe the family and their legal representation should be involved in that and be able to see it. But also understand that if we are just giving out body worn cameras to always prove our innocence, even when we're right, we are losing our humanity. Because when there's loss of life, the family loves their family members. Now, this is just my perspective. It's my opinion. You don't have to agree. But if all we're doing is showing just because we want to be right, and most of the time I believe that officers are right. I really believe that. I've seen it. I've been involved in it. But at the end of the day, we lose our humanity when all we do is do it for the gratification or under the pretense that the public needs to know. But it really is just a gratification of being able to see something that's ugly and nasty so everybody can weigh in. And that doesn't help either the law enforcement agency, and it certainly does not help the public at all. But, it doesn't mean my position don't change. At some point in the future, we may just have to release all this information. But irrespective if we do or we don't, the leadership in every capacity in these organizations need to be in contact with the family, even if the citizen did something that warranted the deadly force. Law enforcement, in my opinion, does not go into these scenarios looking to take loss of life. And so we should be willing to sit down with certainly the family members and their legal representation to determine what does that look like going forward. And so I'm open in that regard, really big on the budget, really big on the operations. There are some things when it comes to operations like narcotics and vice operations that, require some practices that are lawful, but we don't necessarily want the criminal element in society to understand what it is we do and how we identify offenders, drug dealers, or perpetrators. And so, but that's why you always hear me say where we can be transparent, we most definitely should be, and be able to go to the public and answer questions where there's a demand for them. Crisis management. Some people say, well, what does that really mean? Well, despite what a lot of people think, the Mobile Police Department is the big show in the southeast region of this country. And when it comes to hurricanes, when it comes to crisis call outs or hostage negotiations, the Mobile Police Department is a well-oiled machine, and we don't just go out there and do whatever we want to do, and most agencies don't, right? But when you compare the Mobile Police Department that is essentially in charge of all emergency situations, hazard situations in the city, and I would probably say the county as well, you don't see the Sheriff's Department taking the lead on that. You see the Mobile Police Department taking the lead on it. They have the hazmat team, the search and rescue teams. They also have and run the operations when we deal with weather-related incidences like major hurricanes. Now, that doesn't mean that the Sheriff's Department doesn't have a SWAT team, but what I'm telling you is the lead agency has always been the Mobile Police Department in every capacity that I'm aware of. Now, the Sheriff's Department does have a search and rescue flotilla department, and I think they're top notch as far as I'm concerned. And they probably take the lead when it comes to those type of scenarios. But as a whole, when you talk about crisis management, we're talking about the experience in writing operation plans. When we write a hurricane plan for the City of Mobile Police Department and for the city, you're essentially talking about 500-man sworn officers. And where do you do that, and how do you break that out in phases, right? Because if you have a hurricane, they're so vulnerable, they change from hour to hour. So you're not going to call in 500 people, but you may call in 50, you may call in 75. There's phases of that deployment, and what does it look like? And then you have to reverse that when the storm is over and the resources that are not needed. How do you collapse that? You don't just pull them all off duty at one time. There is a process for that, and it's not to say in that particular case with crisis management that the sheriff is ignorant. He's just ignorant to those processes because the sheriff department has never had to take lead on that. I don't know that that changes when I become the sheriff. However, you do want someone that is capable of being able to put operation plans together, narcotic vice operation plans. If you're dealing with a serial rapist, that is a crisis. How do you deal with that? And I don't know that the sheriff's department's ever had to deal with it. I know that the Mobile Police Department has had to deal with it. And I used to be a supervisor, a sergeant over the assaults and sex crimes unit. And we had situations where we had to put task force together and to be able to attack a problem. And so that's what we mean by crisis management. And that's not to take away from the sheriff in any capacity other than it is a qualification of the job. And that's what we're trying to show you. All right, the next one, we've talked a lot on this podcast about budget experience. I know a few deputies, it wasn't a lot. Most of the deputies are not happy with that situation that we talked a lot about with the money on the podcast. But when you've got a deputy that made in excess of $100,000, more than 2,500 man hours of overtime on top of a 40-hour work week, 2 days off during the week, not including extra security jobs that person worked, not including sick time taken off or vacation time with their family that they had to take off. This is an example of what we mean there's no budget oversight. Now, I stopped short of saying that officers or deputies were stealing, but I find it very hard-pressed to know that a deputy could work that many hours and not be fudging the numbers somewhere. And I say fudge, but if the numbers were fudged, it's stealing. It doesn't matter how you look at it. But if you'll remember on one of the former podcasts, I've also said that, not when I was the chief, but there were times over the years where officers were caught stealing. But this is the type of thing that we're talking about when we're talking about budget experience. And that doesn't rest with the deputies. That rests with the sheriff. And that rests with the undersheriffs or the chief deputies that are responsible for managing and watching that money to ensure that, hey, we have enough money to last us for the year. And perhaps the lack of budget experience would explain that, the sheriff is now $17 million up over the last 4 fiscal years. And we still have deputies, even according to the sheriff during the last forum we had on Dolphin Street, said that he had patrol cars. He had some patrol cars out there with 300,000 miles on it. It gets back to the overtime. I'm not upset that there was overtime that needed to be spent, but if you remember, the sheriff said that he couldn't control the overtime. He used a lot of overtime in the jail, but we just did not see that overtime expense in the jail. We seen it on the enforcement side. My argument is that it's not that deputies can't make money or earn money. They typically do it through supplementing their income with extra jobs. The argument is, if we have millions of dollars that are being spent every single year just in overtime, then perhaps we don't have enough deputies in the field. And maybe this explains why response times are 45, 55 minutes on average. And I actually brought that up during that forum that we had on Dolphin Street, and I brought it up to the public, and I said maybe the sheriff could clear it up, but the sheriff didn't clear it up. And so he had an obligation to that group or to those groups of people to say, no, the sheriff, Brian is wrong. It's not. Maybe it's this. I could tell you what the average response times in the city of Mobile, and they were different precinct to precinct because of the geography and the call volumes. That's what real leadership does. But the budget is so important that you need somebody that has the experience. Now, Birch was a captain for 10 years. He was over the criminal investigations department, and I think the year before he became the sheriff, they promoted him. My understanding was the chief deputy. But a year, 12 months is not enough time to learn how a budget actually works, how to monitor that budget, and what are the best practices in that. It's not enough time to learn how to operate a jail. It's not enough time to operate the enforcement side and learn what the overall arching issues are. It takes time. And I've got 15 years at the staff and executive staff level at the Mobile Police Department, and and that doesn't change or make him a bad person. It's just because of the sheriff's office and the Mobile Police Department. They're apples and oranges. But you get so much more experience at the Mobile Police Department because it is an urban agency, it is a large agency, and it has so many different moving parts to it. All right, we'll move on. Public relations experience. As we go through and talk a little bit about this, what does that mean? Well, you've never seen me demonize or disparage anybody publicly. When a critical incident happens, the leader, the police chief, the sheriff is responsible for going live and giving limited information to the public about something that affected the public in a way that it happened in the public, or homicides that are one of the most egregious crimes that society has to deal with. And so the sheriff and the police chief, they have to get up and talk about those things. Law enforcement executive leader, we have to understand that words matter. We have to understand that even if we were prejudiced, racist, or biased, or a bigot, by God, we shouldn't show it to the world. And if we are, we shouldn't be there. But if we are, then when you don't have the wherewithal and the understanding why you shouldn't say some things, it hurts your organization. It hurts the image of that organization. It hurts it in court. It gives these officers and the leader a bad reputation when they're testifying in court. Perhaps that's maybe what he's been trying to do. I don't know. It makes no sense to me. People are people. It doesn't matter who we are. And let me tell you, one thing that I can tell you is we all want the same thing. What we battle is a lot of the activism that comes against law enforcement and police work. But the people in general, I have sat in the living rooms from the poorest to the wealthiest, black, white, and everything in between. We all want the same thing. We all want to be safe. What people want is that law enforcement are not going to be prejudiced, racist, bigoted, and they're going to do things in a fair and equitable way. We live in a society today. Look how many families now have been integrated with all types of culture. And at the end of the day, when you do these kind of things, it shows that we can't do our job of enforcing the law and holding people accountable without being biased, without being racist, without being prejudiced. And I don't subscribe to that. The law is the law. It's not political. You violate the law. Law enforcement's responsibility is to bring people to the courts to face the allegations of breaking the law. It's not even our responsibility as law enforcement officers to adjudicate and find people guilty at all. And I took an oath of office to do that. It's a separation of powers. Policing has their lane of travel. The prosecutor has their lane of travel. The judicial system has its own lane of travel. And when we start trying to take up those paths of other lanes that we don't have any business in, it creates a lot of problem. And yes, it hinders working relationships. I'm very big on working with people to resolve issues. Okay. Anyway, I just think that there's enough said on that. I don't even really have to articulate it. You've never seen it. If you look at Thursday, I can tell you from having to work in narcotics for more than 10 years, drugs is no longer in the back alleyways or in the ghettos, if you will. They're on Main Street, USA. They're in Spring Hill. People are battling addiction. And we live in this world where it's like everything's fine. Everybody's on social media pointing their finger at every single person. You did this, you did this, you did this. But then when you get caught doing that, and God forbid you have a drug addiction, an alcohol substance abuse problem, and then now you find yourself on Thug Thursday and we're ridiculing and mocking people for having those type of issues because I don't have a drug problem, doesn't mean that drug problem is not a real thing that people are battling. And yes, I'm empathetic, not sympathetic. I'm empathetic because I understand those are human flaws, and we all face those in some form or fashion. But I'm also not naive. I'm empathetic because there's victims involved with a lot of these cases, okay? And the victims deserve retribution, restitution, if there's, any type of monetary loss. But for the executive leader to go on social media, mock and ridicule people, I don't care what the crime is. That is not the law enforcement's role or responsibility to be mocking and ridiculing. If you'll do that, then that means you're not taking your oath of office serious. That means, in my opinion, you'll lie on people, you'll prosecute people, you'll do everything you can if it suits your needs. I'm not that guy. I don't subscribe to that. We'll move on. Community meetings. My understanding, there are no community meetings monthly, quarterly, biannually, or otherwise. The sheriff's main responsibility when it comes to enforcing the law is in the unincorporated areas, Chunchula, Wilmer, Grand Bay. And when we move people and the resources out of these areas to go and police other cities that have police departments, we're going to lose something there. And so we really don't know what the issues are in the county. I've heard a lot, drug problems for sure. I've also understood that response times are a big problem. Maybe the sheriff doesn't know because we don't have community meetings. My commitment is to have quarterly meetings throughout the county, including these jurisdictions, City of Saraland, Satsuma, Creola, Pritchard, to find out how the sheriff's office can help work with their agencies for best management practices in policing to be able to reduce crime, give people the quality of life that they certainly want. Youth programs. I've been involved in a lot of youth programs. I came up with a conceptual idea of bridging the gap with the city of Mobile, and incidentally, it was adopted through the Department of Justice and the FBI in some form or fashion, called different names. Now, James Barber essentially stole that. He told me he stole it. I'll give him that much, but he stole that, and he gave it the name. But the conceptual idea was mine, and what that was, and that'll be one of many. But at the end of the day, it's law enforcement seeing the eyes from the public on how the public sees law enforcement. And then, of course, in reverse, citizens seeing through the eyes of the windshield of the police car, and what officers have to deal with. And working with a lot of the youth, especially in the high school level. And we would continue to do certain programs like that. There were other programs that we were involved in, the SCORE program, Second Chance or Else. Now, that was not my program, but I did think it was a good program in trying to help nonviolent offenders succeed and forego prosecution in lieu of doing some things to stand them up to be productive in society, whether it was getting a GED, helping them, start a business in some form or fashion by getting driver's license and showing them what the processes were and trying to help them in that type of way. There's a lot of programs with Strickland Youth Center. I just don't know that the sheriff's office currently works with any youth program, and if he does, he doesn't share any of the information that I am aware of. And then, of course, last but not least, proven crime results. I've for the last couple of months, I have talked a lot about what the crime stats were. Now, I probably talk a lot about the crime in the crime report because we have a record in 2.5 years as the chief of police. We put some things in place that were very instrumental. We reduced homicides some 65% over 2.5 years, from 21 certainly to when I left office the first quarter of 24. And, we essentially reduced all violent crime by double-digit numbers for the most part. We had the best single-year crime reduction in 2023 since 1988. Now, you wouldn't know it again because perception is something we don't talk a lot, but on social media and broadcast media, they sensationalize a lot of the reports. But when you compare the city of Mobile's crime rate to other comparable cities like Jackson, Mississippi, or Montgomery, our crime rate is almost about half of theirs. So we did really good, and I'd love to take all the credit for it. I just came up with the strategy and the plan, but it was the men and women of the police department that no doubt carried out those marching orders, and kudos to them if they're watching. I've made a point to say that the sheriff's office, and I gave Bert credit. I said, I don't think the sheriff's office has ever given out an annual crime report of what it looks like. I think there should be an annual crime report that says, here's what the crime looks like in the unincorporated areas, and then when we add all the aggregate of crime from all the other jurisdictions, that's essentially 2 set of crime report numbers we should be able to give to the Republicans. That this is what crime looks like in the county as a whole. Some of these other jurisdictions we have no control over, but here's what it looks like in the unincorporated areas where the sheriff does have all control to be able to reduce that crime. I'm very proud of the record that we had, to include reduction of attrition. That's people retiring early because they don't like the leadership, or people quitting and going to other agencies. Those are leadership issues. Those are not necessarily compensation issues, right? We were able to fix those problems to the extent that we reduced attrition some 48% over that 2.5 year period. That is a record. You may not like me as a person. That is a record. Now, while the sheriff's office has never put out this type of information, and I think this goes into open records and transparency for you, the public, you give the sheriff's office money to operate, we should do good by your money. We should tell you just how well we did with your money. Well, that being said, I've been talking about this since January, and the sheriff has had enough time, and I'm sure he's got people that work in the data processing unit that could have put these numbers together. Now, there are numbers. Initially, when I first reported it, I could not find the numbers, but however, I did go, and we were able to locate some numbers. I don't know, maybe they just appear, who knows, with the state. But here's how it works. The agency, the law enforcement agency, has to give their numbers to the state of Alabama. The state of Alabama is responsible for reporting their numbers, certainly to the FBI, who puts it out essentially to the world. Now, that being said, we did find some numbers, and what we found is there was essentially a 95% clearance rate. Well, I don't have to look at all of his numbers to know that that is wrong, because larceny cases, for the most part, I believe, make up the bulk of all crime reported in a jurisdiction. For example, the Mobile Police Department typically had about 60% of all of its crime was in regards to larceny theft cases, right? And so the national average clearance rate is somewhere between 15 and 19%. We showed that on the former podcast. And so if you add 60% of Mobile police numbers to all crimes with the city of Mobile, well, if you just had violent crime, you may have had about an 80 or 90% clearance rate. But then when you add in those larcenies, now you're back down under 20%. Or 18% or 25%. The point is that when you have such a bulk of numbers from an agency that are added in to all the crime, which have to be counted, there's no way you can have a 95%. It is virtually statistically impossible to have a 95% clearance rate. Either that, or he's got some jam up investigators. And let me just tell you, maybe they are good, but I still say statistically it would be impossible. So when bringing this up, I believe the sheriff also had an obligation to say, what better way for me to prove Paul Prine is a liar? And yet, on any of these issues, he has not addressed it. He's not talked about it. And the few things that he has talked about, like the Second Amendment and the body cameras, well, he's told you how he feels. Second Amendment wants to chip away at the department that's scary because it's about money. It's not about your rights or Constitution, which we should uphold as the sheriff. And body-worn cameras, he believes the burden should be on the people. If you think that, and he didn't say that, that's what I'm saying, but that's essentially what you are saying, is that, we trust our deputies at everything, and I do trust the deputies. But as Ronald Reagan once said, trust but verify. Body-worn cameras keeps everybody honest. It keeps citizens honest. It keeps deputies honest. And I have learned firsthand experience that most of the time our officers do things the right way, and it really helps with that trust and transparency going forward. My friends, thank you so much. Listen, I know this was a lot. I thought it was important because a lot of people said, well, anybody can make this comparison, and it's skewed based on what you put in it. Well, how many people are going to come forward and say, well, here it is, and I didn't skew it? These are either his actions, his words, or the lack of actions and words is the reason why we were able to build out this comparison. I'll also make a note of one more thing. Education is so important in today's professional world. I don't believe that education is the fix-all, end-all to anything. I really don't. But it does reduce litigation and mitigate risk in the business, right? And so I think it's important. Now, with me, I have a bachelor's degree, and then, of course, in business administration, and I have a master's degree in criminal justice. And I went to Faulkner University, and I wasn't able to go to college right out of high school, but I did go back. And incidentally, Faulkner is a for-profit college. I probably paid a little bit more for my degree than it would have been if I'd have went to South, but they made it very convenient for adults to go back to school. But understand this, Faulkner's a great college, but what's important for me was obviously, you know, the way they were able to schedule for adults who were working full time to come to school, but that they're also accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges. And, you know, same accreditation of South Alabama, Auburn, Alabama, and all these other great schools, right? So it's a great program, and it was a great school. And certainly the Jones School of Law is also a part of Faulkner University, which is primarily a Christian college. The sheriff says he has an associate's degree and a bachelor's degree. I don't remember what the associate's was in. The bachelor's, he says, was in Homeland Security. Doesn't mean that there's not a degree in Homeland Security. I don't know what that is. You know, perhaps Columbia Southern University offers it. I'm not really sure, but, you know, even in his bio, he doesn't list where he goes to college. Am I suggesting he's lying? No. But I do know that most executive leaders understand that while education is only one part when it comes to qualifications and experience, but it's a big part, we've got a bunch of educated derelicts in society. Don't mistake what I'm saying. But what I'm simply telling you is that education is important because it shows that you had the discipline, and it also shows that you had the capacity to learn your craft, your trade, or whatever it was that you needed to do to be successful in your trade. And so I'm not really sure. Maybe the sheriff can come out and tell us where he got his education from and share that. Perhaps he does. I'm not saying he doesn't. But, you know, it's kind of odd that a lot of times leaders or people don't put where they got their education from. So if he's listening, if he's watching, I do think that's important. I would ask him to make a declaration of it. One last thing, I did call for a debate. We had no real expectations that the county sheriff would open himself up to a debate, because if you don't have the qualifications, if you have the track record that we've shown you, I probably wouldn't debate the challenger either, just to be frank with you. But I do think that there is no greater job, no greater importance than that of the sheriff in the state of Alabama, and certainly as the head law enforcement executive officer in this county. And you should know what the issues are. And I have a public record, and certainly a lot of people would ask questions about that. Forums are great. You don't really get to talk a lot and really explain why you do what you do. That was the whole point of my podcast. But, you know, we have just short of 2 weeks left for primary day, May 19th. So if somebody wants to host a debate and you can get the sheriff to come and let's debate it and televise it, or even run it on social media live, like Facebook Live, I'm definitely open to it, because I believe in transparency. It doesn't matter what it is. My friends, thank you again. We'll do one more podcast next week before the primary on May 19th. Now, it's too late to register if you're not registered, but if some reason you were not able to get registered, listen, talk us up if you support this program. Certainly, Prime Time on YouTube and Prime for Sheriff on Facebook. But listen, we can change this thing, and we can make it for the better. And if you really want to change, certainly the way public safety looks in Mobile County, and you really want to change the political dynamics in this county, you can do it May 19th. We're asking for your vote for Mobile County Sheriff. We'll see you again on the next program. God bless.
Spinning it for sure. When the badge meets the weight of the choice, people deserve to know it's more than talk.